Welcome back to Uncharted, your sidekick for life, the podcast where we explore the transformative power of mentorship in shaping tomorrow's leaders. In this episode, Dan, Leon, and myself are joined by our guest, Dan Graham, founder of Notley, a family office with a focus on philanthropic investments. Graham shares why he has chosen to dedicate himself to young minds and emerging businesses, and also shares his journey from being a student in Austin to becoming a successful entrepreneur, which is nothing short of inspiring. Whether you're a student on the cusp of high school graduation, or you're a college student working to learn the skills needed for your career, or you've graduated from college and you're a young adult looking to join the workforce, you all face anxiety, stress, and the unknown. In this episode, our Gen Z contributors who were interviewed by Anais include Kiera, who recognizes the impact community has on her, Rafaella and Luke, who share their take on whether college is necessary or not, Trevor, who gives us a peek inside his mind about time management and his constant questions of if he's doing enough, and finally John, who encourages his fellow Gen Zers to keep pushing forward. It's not rock bottom. We've all faced depression and hopelessness. Thank you all so much to all who participated. Let's jump in.
I'm so excited for episode 2 of Uncharted, this journey that we're on, and mentorship. There's some really great questions that have been posed to us this week, and we have a new guest, a guest host, Dan Graham.
Special guest.
I don't know about that, but I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for coming.
Dan, will you tell the audience a little bit about your background and some of the things you've gone through and how they can expect this mentorship to go?
Sure. So I grew up here in Austin, Texas, and ended up going to University of Texas for both undergrad and grad school. My undergraduate degrees are in computer science and philosophy, and then I went to UT for law school. I actually started doing entrepreneurial stuff while I was still in law school, working in the basement of the law school doing programming for websites, and occasionally picking up bigger project gigs. I stumbled with a couple of buddies of mine who had moved back to town after undergrad, stumbled into an opportunity in the custom printing space to build a Photoshop style tool that you would embed on the website and customers could buy their own products. We ended up launching that while still in school, calling it Build a Sign, which I know is a super creative name. And through a good bit of luck and a lot of late nights and hard work, it ended up working out, and that business took off, and I spent the next 10 years growing that business. Ultimately, in 2018, selling it to Vistaprint, and had just effectively a life-changing transaction for my family. And along the way, as we were getting closer to that, started to think about what I wanted to do with the next chapter. And so my wife, Lisa, and I launched our family office called Notley. And out of Notley have been doing philanthropy, but also a lot of investing, both in impact businesses, but also more traditional investments ever since, and have been having a blast doing that. And so now I spend my time working with founders in investing in early stage companies that have usually really cool tech, and spending time helping them build their businesses so that ideally they could have an exit one day as well. And just really enjoy doing that. I spend a lot of time networking as well, with both nonprofit leaders, business leaders, and young professionals looking to grow their careers, who have a heart for impact, but also are super ambitious and like to really drive hard at being successful in their careers.
I love that story on one of the magazines that we found, Austin magazine, and one of the cover stories we put on there. So I've really enjoyed that. And I've also enjoyed the kind of mentorship work you've done along the way. So obviously with all these opportunities comes a lot of learning, a lot of lessons from those first 10 years where you received mentorship and you have your own mentors. And then along the way, obviously, now paying it forward and your mentorship towards others. So that's why we've got you on.
I want to ask, is that how you got into wanting to mentor other younger minds, because you were mentored along the way? You had people in your life that were
Yeah, it's
guiding.
growing a business is I had a couple of great co-founders, but it's really hard and really lonely, and none of us knew what we were doing. And it's not really something, I guess, these days increasingly there's a lot of things like this, but there's not really a class for it. And so the best way to learn what's coming, to work through challenges, is to find others who have done it before, or peers who are doing it concurrently, and network with them and spend time building those relationships. And that's effectively the main way to build those skill sets and build those muscles over time. Absolutely, the idea that I could contribute back in that same way was always something that was important.
That's cool.
Well, awesome. We have got several. Anais has been hard at work and got several questions for us from students and the other Gen Z that she's gone out and interviewed. So let's go ahead and play the first one.
At the moment, what do you struggle with the most?
I guess right now it's trying to figure out if I'm going about my education the right way. I'm like way down the race. Like, I see the people, I don't even see the people in the front. They're like already off in the distance. I'm still like, I feel like I'm sometimes like super heavily breathing all the time and be like, am I there yet? Am I like at least halfway through? Am I in the lines of sight? And I'm thinking this as a freshman, and it kind of scares me for where I'm supposed to be farther down the line.
Okay, I think we can all relate
Yeah.
to that. So comments. I mean, I think part of it is just her listening and understanding that we're all there at some point. Just like kind of feeling like, oh my God, am I? It's to me, it reminds me of the imposter syndrome. Am I where I'm supposed to be? Because all these other people seem like they're much further ahead, and I don't know.
But that's the thing with imposter syndrome, though, right? To really change yourself, you have to behave differently. You have to behave as the person you're trying to become, right? And the thing I always sort of saw imposter syndrome happens as you are essentially pretending to be the person you want to become. First, you're not that person. You have to pretend to. Imposter syndrome isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign that you are changing into a much greater person than you were yesterday. And that's, I don't know, that like I used to feel a lot of that. And then as time goes on, it's like, no, you are working really hard to be someone you're not, bigger than yourself. And yeah, it will feel like you're pretending. It'll feel like you're an imposter, but that's not what you're doing at all. That is what progress feels like, I think.
Yeah, and growth is uncomfortable.
Right.
I think also too, one of the misconceptions is that imposter syndrome is rare. And I've been on a lot of panels and in discussion groups actually about imposter syndrome with other founders and CEOs. And what I found is the most successful founders all have imposter syndrome. It's actually what drives them. It makes them stay up later. It makes them try harder. It's a big part of fundamentally why they've been successful, is this anxiety of being behind and needing to catch up. And so that was something also that was really, because I struggle with imposter syndrome. And so that was always something that was really, I don't know if comforting is the right word, but at least the idea that it's a common feeling across people who are actually leaders and who are actually, by all objective standards, winning that race.
I listen to a lot of female founders, and one unanimous thing that everybody kind of agrees on, and women wise, is that we all kind of have to channel our male energy in order to get ahead. And I notice things happen quicker in my life and faster in my life. I'll write a flowery email and then I'll put it in ChatGPT, like, write it like a man. And it's like 2 lines and I'm like, send. And I get responses, like it works. I hate to say that. I don't want to put down women in any way, but there's something about feeling like an imposter in business as a woman and having to sort of channel that masculine energy to sort of be seen and get respect.
There are those studies that show that too, where if they take a job description and they ask men, if they're qualified for that job or not, on average, a man needs to be like actually qualified for like 10 to 20% of it before they say, oh yeah, I could go get that job.
Right.
And for women, the average is 100%. Like in the job description, they will feel like they were unqualified unless they have every single box check that job
Right.
description puts out there.
Right. So why not us? Why not put that
Right.
masculine energy on and be like, I got 10% of that in the bag. Let me just be seen for it.
And I think part of it, going back to listen to what she said. I mean, she was like, "Am I doing the right education?" I mean, that there's anxiety there because obviously there's costs associated with it. Make sure that, but she's also looking at around and saying, like, these people are doing more than others or more than myself, and that cause of anxiety. But feels like, it's okay. I think it's take a breath. It's okay. We're all, kind of competing. I like the uh, advice that says you don't compete against others, compete against yourself. Like, just be better the next day, and that's all that you need to do, because every one of us is a unique. I like to think of us as, we're all stardust. We came from a different star at some point, and every one of us has a different calling, and no one else is going to be just like you. So there is something there, and it might take time to figure out what that is, but gotta be patient with yourself and just make that happen.
It is tough though when you're 18, like I remember, a year is an incredible quantity of your life
Mhm.
at
Mhm.
18,
Right.
right? I mean, how long have you like I think your age should start at about 13. You should have negative numbers as a kid, and then you should be what, you should go, I'm 13, you're 1, because now you're vaguely an adult,
Yeah.
right? And then so you're 18, you've been reasonably sort of adultish for maybe 5 years.
Yeah.
And now it's like, okay, I need to get going, right? And like a year seems like forever. Like if I had like failed out a year or something, that would have felt catastrophic.
Mhm.
And now that I'm 37, it's like it would have made absolutely no difference.
Yeah,
to
in
my
fact,
life
if you pick any job and you were to grab 10 peers who all have the same job and you were to ask them how old they are, they're not all going to be the same
Mhm,
age.
right.
Like whether you're 1 or 2 or 3 years apart makes no difference in the grand scheme of things as far as your career goes.
And it's just tough when you're 18 to have that perspective. You just have to, you can be knowledgeable of others' knowledge, but it's really hard to be wise of others' wisdom.
Yeah.
Some things just have to be lived.
Right.
It's just like being a founder. You couldn't communicate that. You can try, you can mentor, but you have to live it, I think, to just know it,
It's funny, the best description that I've heard for being a founder is it's the willingness to run headfirst into a brick wall repeatedly and taking that as a sign of encouragement.
No bounce back.
I have not heard that, and I really like that. All right, let's move on to the next question.
What is your view on college?
Well, I think college is a great thing for, especially people who want to go into like being a doctor, being an architect, like the things that you need that certification for. And otherwise, I think if you want to get a degree in other things, that there are just so many resources out there now that it's not as needed anymore. It's definitely a path that some people can take, but in my opinion, there's way more paths now, and so it's not a must anymore by any means.
Thoughts?
I mean, yeah, it's pretty spot on, I'd say. I think the education system, the higher education system, typically, I assume this talking about the 4-year one for this comment, but hasn't really changed in about 1,000 years, right? Oxford University is about 1,000 years old, and they pretty much teach pretty similarly now. The whole thing is structured, and the world has changed quite a lot. So we were looking in the 50s and the 60s to put a whole bunch of people through more education. Universities look like a really good vehicle for filling that gap. They did their job. And I think now as we're starting to pivot to lifelong learning, to multiple careers, front loading that entire education into the beginning of your life doesn't necessarily make sense anymore. And so I agree. There's a lot of different ways you can get to places. Some of the most successful people I know didn't go to uni. They trained themselves, or they picked it up, or there's no degree course for being an entrepreneur. So I think that's really fair. I think that's a fair
I agree. And I call it YouTube University because you can learn anything on YouTube. But there's also something to say for the community that you do get while at college
Sure.
and university. And the relationships that I have today, because we were going through those formative years at 18 where our problems were globalized and catastrophized, and it felt like the end of the world if we were messing up or doing something, or the beginning of our lives if we were doing something correct. Because we grew with each other and we're all going through that same thing at that same time, it's fostered some really strong relationships that I'm able to lean on. And now they're in many facets of their career, and that makes for a cool network. I know there's also networking events, but it's not the same because you're not going through. I don't think it's the same because it's
formative.
not as formative. That's it. Yeah.
There are a lot of nuances, I think, and it depends on lots of things. College is a unique place to get some things. You mentioned the networking and the social piece. That it's a lot of things that are just handed to you. The forced pacing of going through curriculum versus having to rely on your own pacing if you're taking an
So
online
true.
certification or a class. Some people are great at that.
Mhm.
Some people are not.
True.
And you get a degree, which, while maybe less meaningful than it used to, it's still used by most employers. And so if you're applying for most types of jobs, having a college degree on your resume will float you above someone who doesn't, unless it's in a very specific skill set type of role where they're looking for a different type of background or certification. But it's still very helpful from getting, in a general sense, from getting a job. So I think you get a lot of range of material that you're learning as you go through college versus if you're just taking a specific class in a specific science outside of college. So I think it's hard to be categorical about it. I think it really depends on who the person is and what motivates them and how they like to work, what it is that they're trying to learn, what kind of job they're trying to get. I definitely agree that there are more paths now to different kinds of certifications, and there are certain jobs where you won't actually learn the specific skill you need at college. So it would be like a college plus. Anyway, most programming jobs are like that. Most scientific jobs are like that.
Right.
Most online marketing jobs are like that because the pace and rate of change is just too fast for college to keep up with.
Yeah, I think it has to do with timing, right? Some of the things that we mentioned in our last comment about time is different for everybody. Everybody's going to accomplish something different. So for some people, they may need that structure. Remember a video you sent me, Leon? I think it was Sylvester Stallone saying one of the movies, saying the only reason you go to college is someone showed up. It tells the employer that you showed up somewhere for 4 years and you
Right.
you were. So it's just this structure that you can be there. But also, I think
Did you say Sylvester Stallone?
yeah,
Yeah, there's like some clip.
it was a clip of a video that we sent. It was a
Was it
movie
him or was it in one of his
It
movies?
was one of his movies, but essentially, it was the
We'll
the,
find
the
the clip.
point. The point was well taken. Is like this is why you go. Is because you want to make sure that you can tell someone else that you've done something. You're structured enough to go to be an employee of some sort. So I think to your point, Dan, there's a lot there and a lot of variability and a lot of choice. I know that Apple and IBM, for example, both said you need an 18-month coding certificate to come work for us. So some of these employers are hungry to get you in the door uh, faster because of the speed of technology and everything else. So there is multiple routes. I also, back to your point earlier about lifelong learning, I think that you retool and retrain as technology it just expands and expands and expands. You've got to kind of get new skills along the way. So that front loading may be one of those things where we can just be more patient as a society and saying, look, we're going to get our basics here, but then we'll do some more training along the way, and you end up kind of
Or even
finding your path.
even if you like change the way the existing universities even administered courses, like why do I have to go to 4 years?
Right.
Why couldn't I go for 1, get some partial
Right.
number of credits, some certificate, go off and do some of that work. If I enjoy it, come back.
Yeah.
Do 2 years, whatever. And, like why the idea in university is you go and train to a certain vocational level for which they will certify you, and then you go and apply that work. But that just isn't what anyone does anymore. And the universities haven't been especially quick, which isn't wholly their own fault because there's certifiers and government, like it's a whole ecosystem. But you could even just change the way some institution. I think you need to start changing the way even institutionally we're teaching people, right?
Right.
Because stackable credits, transferable credits, like what happens when I'm 52 and need to learn quantum computing? Like, because I can't really go back to uni. That's really hard to do currently in society, especially for 4 years. So can I do a 1-year thing?
Mhm.
Because I don't know who else is teaching me about quantum computing.
Yeah.
You don't just pick that up, you know.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I think there's a lot of there's scope for even pathways within existing institutions that we're not really talking about as much as we could be.
And those are happening more and more.
They
The
are,
last
they
couple of years, I've been taking classes on the certification online course at Berkeley for
Mhm.
some biosciences stuff, and it works exactly like how you're describing. You could take just one class and get a certification in that class, and then they bundle them together too. So if you want a certification in this slightly broader topic, you know,
Right.
you have to take these 3 classes, but it's all self-paced and online, and then you get the the Berkeley certificate,
Right.
and you just have to pay for the class. You don't have to apply to get in. So it's more broadly open in that way.
What I think is wonderful and worth considering is, and you probably kind of understand this as a founder, that you start a business and you don't throw all your money at a product before you go test it and all that kind of stuff. You develop an MVP, like what's the minimum viable product I can build to see if this is the direction I want to go. And as a company just does that typically in stages, and they test in stages and tests, and it helps them identify the path that they're going to grow in. And I think that education can be looked at that way. You can get what's the minimum education requirement? What's the MER? What's the MER that I need to like kind of get the feel, to your point,
Right.
of like what I want to do. Do I want to do coding for 18 months and see if that's what I want to do? And then go down that point. Because I know, in my own personal experience, having a 20-year-old, since she was 14, there's probably been 70 jobs that she's like wanted to do, if not more. And it's just that today I want to do this, tomorrow I want to do this other. It's just this unknown. And so I think if you just kind of tip your toe into it, kind of start figuring it out, and then seeing where that path leads you and grows you, I think that even based on your life experience, your first 10 years were this, and that allowed you to do something else. And there's also education along the way, even after you've done some life-changing exits and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, I think one of the challenges when you're talking about a job market is that it's not just did you learn the material well under whatever paradigm, college or certification or whatever, or self-study, but also does the employer have the ability to assess that and therefore give you the job or not? And
right.
most employers are looking through hundreds of resumes, and they don't have time to go figure out if the Jones School of Certification is a good place, and if they
Right.
say that so and so
Yeah.
got a certification in C sharp, if
Right.
that means anything or not,
Mhm.
versus if they went to UT in computer science or Harvard
Right.
for business, they kind of have a sense of, oh, they're probably smart
Right.
and spent 4 years doing something. Maybe this is an area where AI can help us. Like
Right.
AI will just interview them for whatever the thing is and tell you whether they know what they're talking about. But right now it's really hard if you've got 100 pieces of paper, resumes to go through and make snaps judgments
Right.
about the
Right.
candidates.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, let's move on to the next one. John, let's see what John has to say.
What did you go through when it comes to like emotions in getting to this job? What did you struggle with the most?
A lot of frustration, a little bit of depression and hopelessness, a little bit of fear, like how am I going to afford XYZ? Was able to quell that a little bit by just taking up smaller, easier to get jobs while I'm searching for like a higher level career job type of deal.
When people will listen to this podcast, there will be someone going through what you went through. And what would you say to them?
If you're in a similar position to me, I'd just say just keep going, dude. You'll get there. Um, there's if you think you're at rock bottom, this might sound harsh, but you can always go lower. Like there's rock, like
True.
true rock bottom is really, really low. And my advice is
Yeah.
just keep going, man. You'll get there. Just find something. Like get rid of that pride, because I had to get rid of a lot of mine.
Thoughts?
Well, I just have to say I love that young man because he's my little brother.
Okay.
And he's also one of the hardest workers that I know. So he wasn't getting that career job with the salary, with benefits, but he was up at 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning doing jobs like building stages for marquee or whatever the case is. So, and I also, when he says you could still go lower, it makes me think of this thing he did in high school at the Naval Academy, a summer session, and they had them training in a pool holding heavy things. I'm sure you can imagine what they were holding, training, and the naval officers would say, you think you're going to give up now? There's still 40% within you that you can give. So if you think you're about to fail, you still have more in you to give. So I'm sure he's recalling on that, maybe not specifically, but yeah. So I'm proud of him. He did get a salary paying job and yeah. But it might not be what he does forever, you know, but it's a great start. Anyway.
Thoughts, Leon?
Yeah, I mean, I always just thought it was a really, I remember when I was 17, my teacher, Mr. Sizer was his name, basically turns to me and says, okay, Leon, here's a form you need to fill out. Decide what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And I was 17. I was barely qualified to make cereal. Right at that, I remember what I was like at 17. And it just seemed so bizarre, even to me then, that you would ask me that. Like, I'm 37. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Like, you know, really, you're probably going to have several careers, several lives in your life where you're one thing or you're another or whatever it is, right? And things happen that can transform you, right? You launch a business, get a successful exit, whatever it is, start an office. Now, all these really interesting philanthropic pieces. And it's really hard to know where life will take you, to Dan's earlier point about us finding our calling. So, I mean, I really sympathize because you want to, I think all people really want to be productive within their societies and their communities, and they want to see the way that the things they're doing are helping people. Most people really like helping people, and it's such a shame, I think, that it can be so hard as well to even understand how your job is helping someone. And then you finally get this salaried job, and then, you know, often you're not happy then either, and then what, right? And then it just asks these really deep questions. And so we took Gen Z, jumped them to the top of Maslow's needs pyramid, and said, okay, figure that one out if you want to be happy at your job, because that's about all there is left. And so I don't know, I just have a lot of, I kind of resonate. Like, who do you want to be? What do you want to do? There's really hard questions to answer. And there aren't really good answers out there. Really, you just got to find them yourself. So I don't know, that's a rambly answer, but that's kind of what I'm where I'm at.
Yeah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people fall into things. I don't think most people are as intentional, even as it sounds like he was being about, okay, well, here's what I'm doing right now, but ultimately I'm interested in pursuing this other set of options, and, you know, being thoughtful about, like, well, how do I balance my time and energy that I'm putting into the thing I know I have to do in the moment with what I know I want to go pursue and find and explore later and for a bigger part of my career journey. I think most people just sort of wake up every day, heads down, do their job, or they take whatever job happens to fall in their lap, and then that ends up being their career. And so I think it takes to be really intentional, I think, is hard, and it's also unusual, you know, but to get into a very specific place career-wise, it does, I think, take intentionality.
Yeah. I was going to say what this reminds me of. He talks about depression. He talks about, you know, just the different emotions that he's gone through getting that first job, and it does take me back to that place. And I was having a conversation with my daughter this morning about where she's at. She's at 20, and she's, you know, trying to figure life out. And I remember being at that point thinking, it's all on me. I've got all these decisions to make, and this I don't know if it's societal pressure I put on myself, or just kind of here's what I'm getting from the messages that I'm getting, is I've got to figure this stuff out. And the reality is now I'm 50, you life's a lot slower now for me because I don't have to make all these decisions and write this. And I also know it's not all on me. It's like the universe has got a plan and there's things happening and everything will kind of work itself out. So there's just a lot more patience with myself as far as whatever venture I'm going into. And I think that, that was kind of some of the things I was telling her this morning. Is like, look, I know you're trying to figure this out and it's just part of life, but also take time to breathe and just take time to just like be okay with not knowing everything yet
Well,
because
the entire childhood and educational journey is not geared around teaching us how to meander.
right.
It is
Standardized.
Yeah, it is like you are at step 3, tomorrow is step 4, and you better be ready for step 5, and you're grooved, and you have to be in this
Yeah.
on this path.
Yeah.
What you're talking about is not is not discussed, encouraged, nor offered as
Right.
an option for our kids.
Right.
That's true.
Unless you're in Montessori school.
Unless you stay in Montessori school, in which case you live in the woods
Right.
at some point.
Right.
That's probably not true.
I think that humans we're just complex individuals, and sometimes it's what do we pay attention to, what do we listen to, and that's why mentorship is so important, because we do have the standard process, and then you have your mentors that come in and say, yeah, that's all good for this, but there's all these other parts of the world that'll kind of make sense for you, and I think that's where mentorship is so important.
I do want to jump back to something that you touched on actually that I really appreciated, right? Which is you don't find it's not that you suddenly find this vocational calling in the world for you, right? You just you sort of do a thing and you do it a bunch, and then you find things about it that you like and that you're good at, and that takes time, and then suddenly some opportunity comes up and you take that opportunity, you say yes, and you work hard, and you were kind of lucky, and then suddenly you have a vocation and a calling, right? And that meandering is very natural in life, and exactly, the education system doesn't teach it at all. It always assesses you relative to your peers. Many people feel like they're behind. It can be really hard to find meaning, because I think meaning more is a product of work. It's a product of, like doing something, persevering, and isn't just something that spontaneously shows up in your life one day.
Yeah.
And so, going back to what he was saying, and obviously the person before, that is something I think that's missing from us societally, perhaps. You could just get a job in a factory and it would pay well, and American dream, and that kind of worked out. It did, right? But today the game's very different.
Reminds me of what you said. Reminds me of a health podcast. I forget the name I was listening to the other day. It's talking about how the brain works and how there's specific times where your brain grows, whether it's muscle or whether it's anything you're learning, and there's got to be a frustrating part of that for your neurons to make connections and
Wow, yeah.
and that growth happens. So even though it may feel frustrating, understand this is part of that journey to like get to the next level. So
It makes me wonder if he ever regretted going to college because it was so hard for him to find a job. Like, well, what was the point of the last 4 years? I don't want to speak for him, but I'm sure that the frustration and the struggle went through his mind. Like,
right.
If it's this hard to find a job after college, what would it have been like before?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to what you said earlier, having something that says I've been here, done this, at least to your point, just seeing both sides of that coin.
Mm-hmm.
If he didn't have that, it'd be what he said is if you think you've hit rock bottom, it'd have been even lower than that.
Right.
So. All right, let's move on to Kiera.
So it seems to me like you're used to being part of a community. In your family and also in high school, you were part of so many clubs. So you had your community even inside your high school. So how are you navigating right now the fact that you're probably wanting to create a new sense of community also in college? Are you starting to build that up, or do you have like thoughts about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've never thought about it that way, but I think that's absolutely so true that I kind of like geared towards like trying to create communities, like trying to meet new people, just like trying to get like familiar with a lot of people. And then I think it's kind of hard here in college, like I know there's like 72,000 people here at my college. I go to A&M, Texas A&M University, and there's just some moments where I'm like, oh, I don't know how to approach these people. Like, I don't know how to start up a conversation.
Valuable skills. I thought you'd have some nice pointers on this because you build or you're involved with a lot of communities.
Yeah, I think these days, just with the internet and how people can find each other, there's a lot of ways to do what she's talking about.
Mm.
I know even on campuses, there are not just online communities, but hundreds, I'm sure at A&M as well, like
Mhm.
hundreds of student organizations that you can just browse and show up to meetups. There are places where, you meet online and then show up in person to do activities or discuss different things, everything from a particular sport to anime to math to a particular foreign language. Typically there's a theme or effectively an excuse to come together, and then those communities can evolve from there. Not and then going outside the campus, there's tons of those communities as well. But it does take the piece when I've talked to college students in the past, the piece where I found most struggle is with that initial outreach and commitment to actually go be present and to do the thing. One of the most common questions I've gotten when giving a talk to students is, if you could go back in time and do one thing different, what would you do? And my answer is always the same, which is network. Like, pick a number, like 3 coffees a week. You're going to go meet with someone that's interesting that you don't know, and you're going to ask them as part of that, who else should you visit with? And I'll be in a room full of like 1,000 people, and I'll say, start with me. I'll go to coffee with you.
Mm-hmm.
Email me after this, and I could connect you to almost anybody in town in any subject. And then I tell them, how many of you are going to email me? 0. And it's always, I had one time, but it's that's the hard part is
Because of fear?
Yeah.
Because
I assume.
Yeah, I imagine that's the case. Or
It's
or
fear of, like,
insecurity or
I think that you're right. I don't. How would I take this person's time? He's done all these things.
right.
And
Students
what's
are also very time pressured, right? Increasingly, they
Right.
get loaded up and
That's
loaded
true.
up and loaded up
Yeah.
as well, so that can be a factor as well. It's just like, I'd love to get coffee, but I'm so busy
Right.
and I'm so behind.
Mm-hmm.
I have no time.
This reminds
I had a
me.
lot of time when I was
It's because you did that law graduate degree.
That's right. My experience in college was that people spent a lot of time socializing, but really with like their immediate network, like who's on the floor of their dormitory,
True.
and
Who am I going to go drinking with?
yeah, who showed up at the party that I went to, and less time being intentional about their networking or building community. Again, kind of just like what you fall into tends to be the default.
I will say, and I think that you might have a similar experience. I'd love to hear your experience of when you're working that 10 years doing that business, and then afterwards, and how that network, I would imagine, exploded for you. For me, it was when I started the magazine, founding in Austin in 2016. Before that, I've had several careers, and kind of heads down, I'm doing the thing. And before that, I was doing a financial planning, so that I was in the office 40, 60 hours a week, and I saw my customers, my clients, but that was the extent of my network. The second I started that magazine, then I went and interviewed, ended up like 300 plus interviews of founders all over town. And that very first interview just kind of changed my life. And I just loved this. And my growth, I just see the world completely different than I did in 2015. And it was the effect and the education that I received from others. So I guess what I'm saying is not looking at an institution for the only education, but look at the opportunities within the organizations, because that's where a lot of the growth is. Because, and it was not the same people. I didn't know that these individuals that I interviewed. It's just like I got to know them. I got to know you over the process of, let's just connect to this person and see if he wants to do an interview, and then expand my knowledge on process. And so very, very valuable to how you see life is having this growth in others. So did you have some similar experience to that in your?
Yeah, so I grew up suffering from anxiety, and about 2011 I got on medication for it.
Mhm.
And what I thought had just been social anxiety, I realized had been this much deeper anxiety that kind of like was a light switch went away when I started taking meds. And suddenly doing things like networking was really easy, where it had been really hard for me before. And so almost as like for fun, I gave myself a challenge of I'm going to start having copies, and every single person I meet with, I'm going to ask them for 3 names of people that I don't know. This is when I was still running my business.
Mhm.
And so I did that, and then very rapidly had way more people to meet with than I had time.
Mhm.
But I had a similar epiphany of like I was very heads down, the world was very small. I had like my business that I was focused on and nothing else. And it was sort of like going from, living your whole life, walking the streets of a town, to suddenly being like on the mountain next to it, and you're able to see the whole town and understanding where all the different pieces are and how they all work together. And so the opportunities exploded from there for me as well. And so I kind of went at it more from a personal fun challenge, given my new world not having debilitating anxiety anymore, but had a very similar, I don't know, emotional shift and transformation because of it that it sounds like you did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, both of that's really interesting though, because it kind of comes back to this idea of being intentional, right? Of persevering, right? Just keep going. And then also to the sort of meandering nature of things, right? So yeah, you're going to find yourself in some place. Who knows what your opportunities are going to be, but be as intentional as you can as about picking those things. You were running a business, that was what you were up to. And then you decided to be intentional about meeting people, and then persevered through that. And those 3 things kind of brought you this much greater view that we're not teaching kids. The education system is not, it's something you almost have to learn yourself. I got about halfway through my life before I realized it's a DIY. Life is a DIY project, man. Like you got to do it yourself. And I just thought it was really interesting. Both of you kind of like, and a lot of the themes we've talked about have all keep coming back to be intentional, be persevering, and the meandering nature of life.
One of the interesting outcomes, which makes sense thinking on it, but was a surprise to me, is that I found is most people aren't very good at networking. They don't know that many people outside their sphere. Most people like to name drop, and so they name drop the people they know, typically, which are the people they have networked with. And most people don't say negative things about people that they're name dropping and people that they know. And so as a result of those 3 things, if you network with a lot of people, you start getting mentioned by other people to others, and that starts to drive opportunities your way very rapidly. And so suddenly you're going from being someone who's outreaching to network to someone who has a bunch of inbound opportunity to meet new people or get involved in cool projects or have a seat at certain tables or be on certain boards and be involved in ways that just weren't available before, as a result of being a name that people have to reference when they're sitting around at some other table and someone says, do you know anyone who's doing, starting a business, or do you know anyone who's involved in this, in AI, or do you know anyone who's, and then suddenly you are a name that gets mentioned in those conversations. And so that was really interesting as well.
I do want to make a distinction that this reminded me of. When I was still, before the magazine, I was doing networking for business, and that looked very different because there was these networking events and everybody's like handing cards and trying to, it was like speed dating, like trying to get, and I never enjoyed that. My networking changed, and you and I had this the coffee meeting together, and it was the same. It was a no pressure coffee. At this point, I had purpose. The purpose was to tell a story, and at the magazine, and I just noticed how the feel of the networking changed. It was no longer going to these events that had all these people that you're trying to rush through. It was one-on-one coffee, and I just really want to hear your story. I want to learn more about you. And when you made it about the other person, and it was, I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm not here to do any business. I'm here just to learn. Austin is this wonderful place of community. and everybody wants to share, wants to help each other out, at least the people I've met. And that type of networking was so much more productive for me because it was just more, you don't want to get anything out of it. You're going to get something out of it, but you don't know what it is.
Right.
And it's just this really pure form of, I want to know you. I got an hour. I want to know you. And that just led to all kinds of cool things.
That point, on the way over here, I was thinking about some of these videos that I had watched before and what could I offer during this podcast. And one of the things I thought was exactly what you said is if you're anxious going into an event or into the office or whatever it is, a networking opportunity, if you're anxious going into it, take it away from it being about yourself and make it about the other person. And that will ultimately help you arrive to be more authentic because you're giving your time to understand what they have to say. And then you can probably offer something. And through that process, your anxiety will likely lift.
What's interesting is you are there to learn about, but then what you end up happening is often they're facing something that they're trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
And because you're out there networking and talking to people, you can make this natural introduction and you're problem solving along the way and you're giving back to the community. And that's really positive networking. That's where the magic happens.
It's also like one of the things as well, those big networking events, you might meet 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, 50 people, right? You don't really have an impression for what any of them are really like.
Right.
If I meet you at a networking event, we trade cards, and this is a really specific thing that I think I can help you or you can help me or whatever. I'm not going to risk my reputation introducing you
Right.
when an opportunity comes my way, if I even remember who you were. But if I spend an hour chatting to you and we get to know each other and then something pops up and I'm like, oh, I remember that guy. He did this. Hey, where, and I'll email you and be like, hey, this thing popped up. Is it something you care about? And that's what that networking really is. That's that one opportunity and boom, suddenly some company has started, right? It's really chance meetings, how you meet people, get into these enormous opportunities. And they just don't come out of those, like, those, hey, I met 50 people tonight. I don't remember who 49 of them were.
Right.
I have a pocket full of cards. I don't, and I think that's perhaps part of it, or the nature of the opportunity of the networking is these chance opportunities that someone has come across that they direct to you.
Yeah, and I did start using some of those. I didn't have to very much, but started using those opportunities as I met 50 people. 3 or 4 are really, I think there's something there. Let me go schedule those coffee meetings. But it was it wasn't like the networking was done. It was, I've got to follow up and you've got to pursue that and set up that coffee meeting. And then you can get into the real kind of understanding and knowing.
Yeah, the networking meeting was really just more your excuse to send an invite for coffee.
Right.
Hey, we met briefly, but I'd love to sit down.
Yeah.
But your method and something you taught me, Dan Dillard, and your method, Dan Graham, reminds me.
So many Dan. It's 2 Dans.
The Dan Show reminds me of, you've taught me to think abundantly, like there's enough for everyone. And your methodology of networking and introducing to others clearly shows that you have that same thought process of there's enough for everyone. Like I can share this contact with so-and-so. And I also do understand the point you make about not wanting to embarrass yourself if you don't know the person well enough to vouch for them when putting them in front of somebody else. But if you have a good relationship with a person, I also think that there's understanding if the person you're introducing happens to be a dud or whatever.
If I've talked to you for an hour in a coffee shop, there's a good chance I'll make that connection. Right. But if I've talked to you for 2 minutes,
that's it.
I don't really know anything about you.
Yeah.
And then I might make the connection. I might not. I probably just won't even remember you.
Right.
To think about.
That's it. I just like the paying it forward.
Yeah, there's a lot written about having an abundant mindset versus a scarcity mindset, and a lot about, like, there's a great book called Give and Take by Adam Grant that's about this, about if you show up in the world with the goal of helping others and moving their path forward, how just inevitably that comes back to you anyway. in a way that's usually greater than if you were going into every relationship thinking, what can I get out of this
Unimaginably
transaction?
greater. Like things that show up, you're like, oh, I never in a million years would have imagined that, and
Right.
it just shows up. And but yeah, really, really powerful for sure. All right, last question.
Now that you started VlogMe and that you took this path, what keeps you up at night?
We've gotten a bit comfortable with being uncomfortable, which I think is a good thing because it allows us to take risks and it allows us to not, lose hope if things aren't working out your way. It just, makes you think, okay, let's pivot. Let's figure out how to make it work instead. And so it is scary. It's definitely something that a lot of like my peers or a lot of people like around my age aren't familiar with at all because for them, if they want to go into a venture, they could go back home to their parents if everything goes wrong. But our family is 100% in this, and so we're each other's lifeline, and it's exciting, but it's also pretty scary sometimes. But our family motto is that we're not dead yet. So if we're not dead, then how bad can
That's
it
a
be,
great
right?
motto.
We know that as long as we just keep pushing and we have the attitude of, by all means necessary, then eventually we'll get there. It's just a matter of time. And it might be really hard now, but we're able to do this during the hardest part. And so I just think about, when more and more things start going our way and we're building up more momentum, it's like this is going to get really fun. So, we're really excited for the
Yeah.
work ahead as well.
That was pretty insightful at that point.
I'll give a little background about this brother-sister duo. They started a social media company where you could only like film in-app without filters because people their age were experiencing well, it's similar to that. Yeah, but it's called VlogMe, and because people are putting on these crazy filters and making their lips all big and whatever. So they've since pivoted to an AI company, but they didn't want to go to college, and so their parents said, "Okay, well then you're going to take your college fund and put 100% of it into this company," and because they wanted their kids to have some stakes in the game. So this will go back to how important mentorship is. They're very blessed to have the parents that they have guiding them and rooting them on at the same time. So that's just some insight I have about that.
Yeah, I thought, definitely there's a few things here that, they talked about perseverance, just keep going and being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that speaks to a lot of what maybe, the first 20 years about you're under the protection of your home, you've got a home, you're going to school, you're going down this path, and there's this false sense of security that is like, I've got to do these things, everything will work out. And I say false sense of security because it takes more than that. It's and know that it's okay. A lot of this is on you, and a lot of this you will figure out along the way, and you've got to have patience with yourself and all this and that. But I think there's this, uh, if I do this, this will be the outcome. And what they're saying is like, if you can you can go outside of that and be uncomfortable because it's not the way that people are doing it, and I can be comfortable with being uncomfortable and figuring it out. So it's more than just giving a man a fish, it's teaching them how to go hunt for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I heard that there, and I think that's a really important quality to develop, especially if you're going to be an entrepreneur. If you're looking at being a founder, you've got to figure out problem solving, and that's what life is. Thoughts?
I think, one distinction I might draw, they talk a lot about sort of putting it out all out there, going no matter what, having no plan B, effectively sort of the burning the ships strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in general, I would be hesitant to encourage someone to do something that they can't afford to lose. However, if being young is a safety net, they're sharp, they're clearly educated, they're young. If this doesn't work, they've got lots of choices ahead of them versus, someone who's betting their life savings at the end, toward the end of their life on the social media AI venture.
Right.
And so I think like where they are in life, their mentality is awesome and makes a ton of sense. And I think more often than not, students or people who are, maybe not making the decision not to become a college student are too cautious, and they are they're playing it too safe, and they don't take advantage of the unique time that they have at that age to go take some risks that can pay off in a big way. And not to mention the fact that if you're running your own business at that age, you're getting 4 MBAs all at once in probably a 6-month period. So it's going to be an amazing journey.
And a key thing that they said in that was pivot, and that's really important because, the definition of insanity is doing the same things and expecting different results, but being able to pivot and saying, okay, I'm going down this path because I think it's the right way. And when you find that it's not, then what do I need to do to change? And that's a big thing that needs to happen, and having the humility and understand that that's going to happen. I remember doing an interview through the course of all the interviews that I've done, I think the resounding thread amongst all founders is they're in love with the failure. They know that failure is part of the journey, and failure is where you do pivot. And I think understanding that failure is, growing up in the school setting, there's like, oh, you get an F, you get a failure, it's a bad thing. But it's like, here's the areas you need to work on to improve. And when you see it that way, that's what allows business to grow. So it allows you to grow as an individual. I remember doing an interview with a scientist from Austria, and he says, we don't like the word failure here as scientists. We like the word testing, because that's what we do to come up with a light bulb. There had to be 1,000 tests. It wasn't 1,000 fails. It was just tests. And just having that different outlook on life, as far as you're going to run across things and then you've got to make a change and shift. I think that, along with that, being young and having time on their side and being able to take these risks, will allow them to kind of figure it out.
And I think, if, like, to your point, in school, if you have 9 Fs and 1 A, you failed the class. In business, if you fail 9 times and have one huge exit, you're retired.
Great point.
And I think life is very failure tolerant, right? Generally, you can fail out of a course, you can fail that exam, you can, get fired from your job, you could split up from your partner. Like, life still allows an incredible amount of fulfillment and success, even with failure in it. And it's important, I think, because the school system doesn't teach that. When you're 18, like, one failure is catastrophic, can be, right? And that is, again, another sort of missed piece is I think Gen Z probably doesn't appreciate just how much you can screw up and still be incredibly successful. And in fact, it's almost a necessity.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just pick something, run with it. If you wait until you have the perfect solution, somebody else who had a crap solution will have iterated their way to it before you, and they'll win. And so it's just pick something and go. It doesn't matter if it's bad.
One of the analogies I like is for entrepreneurship and this testing mentality is it's not about ready, aim, fire. It's ready, fire, aim.
Right.
Mhm.
And that's how you end up having the highest chance of hitting the bullseye.
That's
I
interesting.
like that a lot.
I always think of nature when it comes to life, because we're all part of nature. You think about how a tree grows, you think about root systems, you think about, it's not a 2x4 that goes straight up. It's not this path. It's these branches that develop, and it's based on whatever challenge is in the way, whatever rocks are in the way. That's how the root systems are going to grow around it. And same thing with the branches, and where the sun hits is where the branches are going to go. So to your point earlier, that's what all these things that hit us in life, these are the adjustments that we make, and we grow a branch or we do different things, and before you know it, it's this wonderful, beautiful tree.
Really weird looking tree.
There you go. That's true.
Somebody once told me,
Wes.
somebody once told me, in the end, everything will be all right. And if it's not the end. So I always think about that too. Like, if things are crashing and burning, it's not the end. This is just part of the journey.
I love it. And on that note, I think we'll conclude segment 2. Thanks for being
Awesome.
here.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for
Dan.
letting me
Dan.
join.
For sure.
Super fun. Yeah.
I love to hear about the power of networking. I know who I'm grabbing coffee with next. Dan Graham, thank you for sharing your experiences and the invaluable lessons you have learned along the way. To our listeners, we hope today's episode not only provides insight, but also inspires you to seek a mentor or become a mentor yourselves, paving the way for growth and success in your own journeys. Remember, every big achievement starts with the decision to try. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time on Uncharted, your Sidekick for Life podcast, empowering Gen Z one person at a time.